The Valorian Empire stretched across 40 star systems and had existed for 3,000 years. Emperor Draxos sat on his massive throne made of black stone and rare metals from conquered worlds. The throne room walls displayed the preserved heads of leaders from every species his empire had defeated. There were over 100 different alien heads mounted like trophies. Each one represented a world that had refused to bow and paid the ultimate price. Draxos looked at them every day to remind himself and his subjects that resistance was futile. The latest species to catch his attention was humanity. These strange two-armed creatures from a yellow star system had been discovered only 50 years ago. At first, the Valorians paid them little attention. Humans seemed weak compared to other species. They had no natural armor or claws. Their lifespans were short. Their technology was primitive when first contact happened. But humans learned quickly. Too quickly for Draxos's comfort. In just 5 decades, humanity had built a respectable fleet and established colonies on 12 worlds. They traded with other species and formed alliances. Some of those allies were species that paid tribute to the Valorian Empire. This was unacceptable. Draxos sent his ambassador to Earth with simple terms. Humanity would submit to Valorian rule and pay annual tribute or face complete destruction. The choice seemed obvious to him. General Lisa Carter stood in the council chamber on Earth when the Valorian ambassador delivered the ultimatum. She was 42 years old with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her uniform displayed 20 years of service and multiple medals from various conflicts. Lisa had fought in the border wars against the Krellian raiders. She had commanded ground forces during the Sigma Station siege. She had seen combat more times than she could count. The scars on her hands told stories of close calls and hard-won victories. The Valorian ambassador was a tall creature with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. He spoke through a translator device that made his voice sound cold and mechanical. He listed the terms of surrender in a bored tone as if the outcome was already decided. Humanity had 3 solar cycles to respond. That was roughly 72 Earth hours. The council members looked at each other nervously. Some wanted to negotiate. Others suggested buying time while they prepared defenses. Lisa listened to the debate for 10 minutes before she stood up. The room fell silent. Everyone knew her reputation. She walked to the center of the chamber and looked directly at the Valorian ambassador. Her voice was calm but carried weight. "Make us," she said. Just those 2 words. The ambassador's face showed confusion. He asked her to clarify. Lisa repeated herself. "Make us submit. Come and try." The council erupted in argument, but Lisa had made her position clear. She would not recommend surrender. The Human Council voted 6 hours later. They backed Lisa's position by a narrow margin. The response was transmitted to the Valorian Empire within the deadline. It was a formal rejection of all terms. Humanity would remain independent and free. They were prepared to fight for that freedom. The message reached Emperor Draxos 3 days later due to the distance between systems. Draxos read the human response in his private chambers. His advisors expected him to order an immediate military assault. Instead, he smiled. This human general intrigued him. She had courage, at least. But courage without wisdom was just stupidity. He would teach humanity a lesson before the real war began. He would break their spirit by removing their strongest leader. He sent for Commander Kresh. The Crimson Blades were the most feared assassination unit in the known galaxy. They had operated for 500 years without a single failed mission. Their members were selected from the most elite Valorian warriors. Each one trained for a decade before their first assignment. They specialized in infiltration and elimination of high-value targets. Kresh was their leader, and had personally killed 14 political and military leaders from various species. He had never failed. Draxos gave Kresh the assignment in person. The target was General Lisa Carter. The method was at Kresh's discretion. The timeline was 1 month. Kresh accepted without hesitation. He selected 11 of his best operatives for the mission. 12 assassins against 1 human general seemed like overkill, but Kresh believed in thorough preparation. They departed for human space within 2 days. The Crimson Blades traveled in a modified cargo vessel that appeared on scans as a simple merchant ship. They carried forged documentation that identified them as traders from the Paxian Confederacy. The Paxians were a neutral species that did regular business with humanity. The disguise was perfect. They passed through 2 human checkpoint stations without raising any suspicion. Station security waved them through after routine scans showed nothing unusual. Kresh spent the journey studying everything available about Lisa Carter. He watched recordings of her speeches. He analyzed her tactical decisions from previous battles. He learned her daily routines and habits. She was scheduled to attend a strategic planning conference at Station Omega-7 in 2 weeks. The station orbited a gas giant in the New Haven system. It served as a regional military command center. Security would be heavy but not impossible to breach. Kresh began planning the infiltration. What Kresh did not know was that human intelligence had been tracking Valorian communications for months. Lisa Carter had built a network of informants and monitoring stations throughout the border regions. She employed experts in encryption breaking and signal analysis. 3 weeks before Kresh received his assignment, her intelligence team intercepted a coded transmission from the Imperial Palace. They could not decrypt the entire message, but key phrases came through clearly. High-value target, human general, Crimson unit deployment. Lisa knew someone was coming for her. She did not know when or where, but she knew the attempt would happen soon. She called a meeting with her most trusted officers. Lieutenant Jake Morrison ran her security detail. Captain Helen Miller commanded the Special Forces unit assigned to her protection. Commander Paul Wright handled intelligence operations. Lisa briefed them on the intercepted communication. She told them to prepare for an assassination attempt, but keep the information classified. They had 2 advantages: surprise in home territory. Lisa made a decision that seemed reckless to some of her officers. Instead of hiding or increasing obvious security, she would use herself as bait. She would proceed with the conference at Station Omega-7 as planned. She would leak her schedule through channels she suspected were compromised. She would give the assassins exactly what they wanted: a clear target and an obvious opportunity. But the conference room would become a trap. The entire station would become a killing ground designed to eliminate whoever came for her. Helen Miller protested the plan. Using the general as bait was too dangerous. Lisa overruled her concerns. The Valorians needed to learn that humanity would not be intimidated. Killing their assassins would send that message more clearly than any diplomatic statement. Jake Morrison agreed with Lisa's reasoning. Paul Wright began setting up the trap. They had 2 weeks to prepare, and they intended to use every hour. Station Omega-7 looked like any other military installation from the outside. The massive structure orbited the gas giant called New Haven Prime at a distance that provided stable gravity and good sensor coverage. Ships came and went regularly, bringing supplies and personnel. Security was tight but followed predictable patterns. To any observer, the station appeared to be operating normally. Nobody would suspect that every corridor and every room had been carefully prepared for combat. Lisa Carter walked through the station 3 days before the conference. She inspected every modification personally. Helen Miller walked beside her, pointing out the hidden weapon emplacements and reinforced defensive positions. The conference room itself had been completely rebuilt. What looked like ordinary wall panels concealed automated plasma turrets. The ceiling contained drop-down barriers that could seal the room into sections. Every entrance had redundant locking mechanisms. The maintenance tunnels leading to the room were monitored by motion sensors and cameras. Jake Morrison showed Lisa the patrol routes his security teams would follow. He had increased personnel by 30% without making it obvious. Extra guards were disguised as maintenance workers and administrative staff. Special Forces soldiers occupied rooms adjacent to every critical area. Response teams were positioned throughout the station, ready to move at a moment's notice. If the assassins came, they would find themselves in a maze designed to channel them exactly where Lisa wanted them. Paul Wright had done his part perfectly. He leaked Lisa's schedule through 3 different channels that intelligence suspected were compromised. Each leak contained slightly different information, but all pointed to the same conclusion. General Carter would be in Conference Room 7 at 1400 hours on the scheduled date. She would be meeting with other high-ranking officers to discuss defensive strategies. Security would be present but focused on the main corridors. The service tunnels would provide the best approach for anyone wanting to avoid detection. The Crimson Blades received the intelligence exactly as Paul intended. Kresh studied the leaked schedules and station layouts. Everything matched what his own reconnaissance had discovered. The humans were predictable. They followed standard security protocols. The conference presented an ideal opportunity. Kresh divided his team into 3 groups. Team 1 would approach through the service tunnels and strike the conference room directly. Team 2 would secure the command center to prevent reinforcements. Team 3, led by Kresh himself, would extract through the docking bay after the mission was complete. The assassins infiltrated the station 2 days before the conference. They arrived separately using different cover identities. Station security checked their credentials and allowed them entry. The forged documents were flawless. 3 posed as civilian contractors hired to repair environmental systems. 4 came as crew members on a cargo transport. The remaining 5, including Kresh, arrived as trade delegates from a minor species seeking to negotiate with human authorities. Nobody suspected anything wrong. Once aboard, the assassins spent 48 hours observing patterns and memorizing routes. They identified guard rotations and security camera positions. They planted small devices that would jam communications when activated. They prepared their weapons and equipment. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Kresh felt confident about the mission. These humans seemed no different from the dozens of other species he had hunted. They would die just as easily. The day of the conference arrived. Lisa ate breakfast in her quarters and dressed in her formal uniform. She checked her sidearm and made sure the small blade she kept in her boot was secure. Helen Miller came to escort her at 1300 hours. They walked through the station, greeting personnel and acting as if nothing unusual was happening. Lisa's heart rate was steady. She had been in combat too many times to feel nervous now. This was just another battle with different terrain. Team 1 of the Crimson Blades moved into position at 1330 hours. 4 assassins entered the service tunnels through an access hatch near the waste processing section. They moved silently through the narrow passages guided by maps they had memorized. Their weapons were compact energy rifles designed for close-quarters combat. Each assassin wore light armor that would stop most small arms fire. They reached the junction point 50 meters from the conference room, right on schedule. Jake Morrison watched them on a monitor screen in the security center. The cameras in the service tunnels were well hidden. The assassins had no idea they were being observed. Jake spoke quietly into his communicator. Team 1 is in position. All units stand ready. Throughout the station, soldiers checked their weapons and prepared to move. The trap was about to spring. The 4 assassins reached the access panel that led directly into the conference room. Their tech specialist attached a device to override the electronic lock. It took 12 seconds. The panel slid open silently. The assassins moved through quickly with weapons raised. They expected to see a room full of officers gathered around a conference table. Instead, they found an empty room with plain walls and nothing else. The team leader realized the mistake instantly. He shouted a warning to his team. Before anyone could react, the wall panels dropped away, revealing automated turrets. The weapons fired simultaneously with devastating accuracy. Plasma bolts filled the room in a crossfire pattern that left no safe space. The first assassin died instantly, hit by 4 separate shots. The second managed to fire back, but his shots hit armored plating that protected the turrets. He went down 3 seconds later. The third assassin tried to retreat back through the access panel. Reinforced doors slammed shut, cutting off his escape. He turned to fight and managed to destroy 1 turret before concentrated fire brought him down. The 4th assassin survived the longest by using his fallen comrades as cover. He fired carefully and took out 2 more turrets. For a moment it seemed he might fight his way clear. Then a turret he had not seen dropped from the ceiling and ended the fight. Team 2 heard the gunfire through their communication devices. They were approaching the command center when their team leader ordered a tactical withdrawal. Something had gone wrong. They needed to regroup and reassess. The 5 assassins changed direction, heading toward a secondary exit route they had planned. They moved quickly through a corridor that appeared empty. Jake Morrison and his security team were waiting around the corner. They had known exactly which route the assassins would take. Helen Miller had positioned her Special Forces unit to block any other escape path. When the assassins rounded the corner, they ran straight into a prepared ambush. 30 human soldiers opened fire from protected positions. The firefight lasted 90 seconds. The Valorian assassins were skilled and deadly. They killed 4 human soldiers and wounded 6 more before being overwhelmed, but they were outnumbered and caught in a kill zone with no cover. One by one they fell. The last assassin fought with desperate courage, using a fallen comrade's body as a shield, while firing with both hands. Helen Miller ended the fight with a precise shot that found a gap in his armor. Kresh led Team 3 toward the docking bay, completely unaware that both other teams had been eliminated. He had heard the gunfire but assumed it meant the mission was proceeding. His team of 3 assassins moved with practiced efficiency. They reached the docking bay level and prepared to secure their escape route. Then the station-wide alarm began blaring. Red emergency lights started flashing. Kresh understood immediately. The mission had failed. His teams were gone. Now he had to adapt and complete the objective alone. He ordered his 2 remaining assassins to secure the docking bay, while he went after the primary target personally. Lisa Carter would be heading for a secure location. Kresh accessed the station directory and identified the most likely destination, the command center on Deck 7. He changed direction and moved through the corridors with speed. His weapons were ready. He had killed 14 high-value targets in his career. This human general would be number 15. Lisa was indeed heading for the command center, but she was not running. She walked calmly through the corridors surrounded by her security detail. She knew the assassins would come for her eventually. When she reached an observation deck overlooking the station's main plaza, she stopped. Jake Morrison protested, but Lisa waved him off. She told her security team to set a perimeter but stay back. This was going to end in single combat. She wanted it that way. Kresh found her 20 minutes later. He entered the observation deck alone, having left his remaining team members behind to cover his retreat. He saw Lisa standing in the center of the deck with her hands clasped behind her back. She was looking out at the stars through the large viewport. She turned when he entered. Her expression was calm, almost serene. Kresh drew his energy blade. The weapon hummed with power. He had killed with this blade more times than he could remember. Lisa drew her sidearm and placed it on the floor. Then she removed the knife from her boot and did the same. Kresh understood. She was challenging him to honorable combat. He appreciated the gesture even if it was foolish. He deactivated his energy blade and extended his claws instead. Valorians were naturally stronger than humans. This would be over quickly. Lisa stood in the medical bay watching the preservation team work. 12 bodies lay on examination tables covered by white sheets. The medical staff moved efficiently between the tables running scans and taking samples. Dr. Karen Hughes supervised the operation with professional detachment. She had been a military doctor for 15 years and had seen plenty of alien biology. The Valorian physiology was fascinating from a scientific perspective, but right now she had different orders. Helen Miller stood beside Lisa looking uncomfortable. She understood military necessity, but what Lisa was planning seemed extreme even by wartime standards. Jake Morrison had no such reservations. He believed the Valorians needed to understand that humans would respond to threats with overwhelming force. Paul Wright was already drafting the message that would accompany the delivery. Every word had to be chosen carefully to convey strength without appearing barbaric. Lisa had made her decision within an hour of the last assassin falling. Standard protocol would involve filing reports with the diplomatic corps. There would be strongly worded complaints through proper channels. Investigations would be launched. Committees would argue about appropriate responses. The whole process could take months. Meanwhile, the Valorians would see human restraint as weakness. They would send more killers. More people would die. Lisa intended to end that cycle immediately. She called her senior staff together in a secure conference room. The bodies were being prepared according to her specifications. She needed to explain her reasoning and ensure everyone understood the stakes. Helen Miller spoke first, expressing her concerns about escalation. If we do this, there is no going back. The Valorians will see it as an act of war. Lisa nodded. They already see us as enemies. We did not start this fight, but we will finish it. Our response needs to be clear and unmistakable. Jake Morrison supported the plan completely. He had lost 4 soldiers in the firefight with Team 2. 6 more were wounded. The Valorians had come to their station and killed human defenders. They deserved no courtesy. Paul Wright offered a different perspective. We need to consider how other species will react. Some might see us as brutal. Others might see us as strong. We should be prepared for both responses. Lisa listened to all viewpoints before making her final decision. We proceed as planned. Dr. Hughes completed the preservation process by midnight. The medical team had worked for 8 hours straight. Each of the 12 Valorian heads was sealed in a specialized container, designed to maintain tissue integrity indefinitely. The containers were clear, allowing the contents to be visible. They were arranged in a cargo crate that would fit in a standard transport ship. The crate had built-in climate control and shock absorption. Nothing about this delivery would be left to chance. Lisa wrote the message herself. She sat alone in her quarters, staring at a blank screen for 20 minutes before typing. The words needed to be simple and direct. No diplomatic language. No elaborate threats. Just a clear statement of fact. She wrote, "You sent your best. I am returning them. Next time, come yourself if you dare." She read it 3 times, then sent it to Paul Wright for approval. He sent it back unchanged with a single-word response. Perfect. The transport ship departed Station Omega-7 36 hours after the failed assassination attempt. The crew consisted of Captain George Davis and 3 volunteers. All of them understood the danger involved. Flying into Valorian space carrying such cargo could easily result in their deaths. George was a veteran pilot who had flown in the border wars alongside Lisa. When she asked for volunteers, he was the first to step forward. The 3 crew members were all experienced combat veterans who trusted George completely. The ship flew under a flag of parley. It was an ancient human custom dating back thousands of years. Warriors who approached under such a flag were supposed to be granted safe passage. The Valorians knew of this custom through their studies of various species. Whether they would honor it was unknown. George programmed the ship's communication system to broadcast their peaceful intentions on all standard frequencies. He also made sure their weapons were charged and ready just in case. The journey to Valorian space took 4 days at maximum safe speed. George and his crew took shifts sleeping in monitoring systems. The cargo crate sat in the main hold undisturbed. Nobody opened it. They all knew what was inside. The weight of their mission hung heavy in the air. They were delivering a message that would change the course of human-Valorian relations forever. George wondered what historians would write about this moment centuries from now. They crossed into Valorian territory on the morning of the 5th day. Immediately, 3 patrol ships appeared on sensors. The Valorian vessels surrounded the human transport and demanded identification. George transmitted their credentials and stated their purpose. "We carry a message for Emperor Draxos. We request permission to deliver it to Imperial Station Prime under flag of parley." The Valorian patrol commander took 30 minutes to respond. Finally, permission was granted. They were given a flight corridor and stern warnings not to deviate. Imperial Station Prime was the largest artificial structure George had ever seen. It dwarfed human stations by a factor of 10. Ships of every size moved in carefully controlled patterns around the massive installation. The station itself looked like a city floating in space. Defensive platforms bristled with weapons. Fighter craft patrolled in formations that demonstrated military precision. George followed the assigned approach vector exactly. Any mistake here would be fatal. The docking process took another 2 hours. Valorian security protocols were extensive and thorough. Multiple scans checked the ship for weapons and explosives. Boarding parties inspected every compartment. When they reached the cargo hold, George showed them the crate. The Valorian security chief examined it carefully. He ran a scanner over the contents, then stepped back quickly. His face showed shock and something that might have been respect. He spoke into his communicator in his own language. George did not understand the words, but the tone was clear. Someone important needed to see this immediately. Imperial guards arrived 20 minutes later. They were massive warriors wearing ceremonial armor that looked like it could stop tank rounds. They ordered George and his crew to remain on the ship. The cargo crate was removed using an anti-gravity dolly. George watched through the viewport as the guards transported it deeper into the station. He hoped Lisa knew what she was doing because there was no way to take this back now. News of the delivery spread through the station within the hour. Everyone wanted to know what the human ship had brought. Rumors flew. Some said it was a weapon. Others claimed it was a peace offering. The truth was far more shocking. When the crate reached the Imperial throne room, even the palace guards seemed disturbed. Emperor Draxos was meeting with his war council when the interruption came. The Emperor dismissed his advisors and had the crate brought before him. His personal guards opened it carefully. When they saw the contents, several of them stepped back. Draxos approached and looked inside. 12 preservation containers. 12 heads of his most elite warriors. The Crimson Blades who had never failed in 500 years. All dead. All defeated by a single human general and her forces. Draxos picked up one of the containers and studied it. Kresh stared back at him with empty eyes. The Emperor had known Kresh for 200 years. He had personally awarded him decorations for successful missions. Now he was a trophy being returned like defective merchandise. Draxos set the container down gently. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. No species had ever responded to Valorian aggression like this. Most cowered and begged for mercy. Some fought back militarily. None had turned his own tactics against him so completely. He found the message Lisa had written. The words were simple but carried immense weight. Next time, come yourself if you dare. It was a direct challenge to his authority, to his power, to the very foundation of his empire. Draxos could not ignore it. If he did nothing, his subjects would see weakness. Rebellions would start. His control would slip. But if he escalated the conflict, these humans had already proven they were dangerous opponents. His advisors were summoned back to the throne room. They argued for hours about the proper response. Some wanted immediate military action. Admiral Vex demanded permission to assemble the Third Fleet and crush human space. General Morak suggested a targeted strike on Earth itself. Others counseled restraint. Chancellor Prex pointed out that the assassination attempt had failed completely. Perhaps negotiation was wiser than continued conflict. Draxos listened to all arguments but made no immediate decision. He ordered the cargo crate to be placed in his private chambers where he could study it. The human transport ship was allowed to depart unharmed. Honoring the flag of parley was important for maintaining certain standards. Besides, killing the messengers would accomplish nothing. The message had already been delivered. George and his crew returned to human space 4 days later. They were greeted as heroes. Lisa met them personally at the docking bay. George saluted and reported mission successful. Lisa thanked each crew member individually. They had volunteered for a dangerous assignment and performed perfectly. The message was delivered. Now they would see how the Emperor responded. The Third Imperial Fleet moved through space like a swarm of metal predators. 200 warships arranged in perfect formation demonstrated the military discipline that had kept the Valorian Empire dominant for 3,000 years. Admiral Vex stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the tactical display. His destination was the New Haven system where human forces were reported to be gathering. Intelligence suggested the humans had perhaps 50 ships defending the system. The math was simple and brutal. 4-to-1 odds meant inevitable victory. Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Defiant, studying the same tactical information from the human perspective. Her ship was a heavy cruiser built 30 years ago and upgraded twice since then. It was fast and well-armed, but not designed for the kind of battle that was coming. Around her, the human defense fleet assembled. 73 ships of various classes and sizes. Some were military vessels. Others were armed merchant ships whose captains had volunteered to fight. Every ship that could fly and fire weapons had been called to this battle. The odds were terrible, but Lisa had advantages the Valorians did not expect. She had spent 6 weeks preparing this battlefield. She knew every asteroid and every gravitational anomaly in the New Haven system. She had positioned supply caches and backup communication relays throughout the region. Most importantly, she had convinced several allied species to secretly contribute ships to the defense. The Keltar provided 12 frigates. The Paxians sent 8 destroyers. Even the normally neutral Dryan Collective contributed 5 cruisers. They did not send these ships out of love for humanity, but because they feared what a stronger Valorian Empire would mean for the entire galaxy. Commander Beth Hayes led the fighter squadrons that would be crucial to Lisa's battle plan. Beth was 31 years old and had flown combat missions for 9 years. She commanded 200 pilots divided into 20 squadrons. The fighters were small and fast, equipped with missiles designed to exploit weaknesses in Valorian shield technology. Human engineers had studied captured Valorian equipment for years. They had found vulnerabilities that could be exploited by precise strikes. Beth had drilled her pilots endlessly on the attack patterns they would need to use. Jake Morrison commanded ground forces, stationed on New Haven Station and the nearby mining colonies. His job was to protect civilian populations if the space battle went badly. He had 20,000 soldiers and extensive defensive fortifications. Jake hoped he would not need to use any of it. If the fighting reached the surface, it meant the fleet had been destroyed. Still, he prepared for every possibility. Evacuation plans were ready. Shelters were stocked with supplies. Civilians knew what to do if the alarm sounded. Paul Wright coordinated intelligence and communications from a command center deep inside New Haven Station. His network of sensors and listening posts tracked the approaching Valorian fleet with precision. He fed constant updates to Lisa and her tactical staff. The enemy would arrive in system within 18 hours. Paul used that time to send false information through channels he knew the Valorians monitored. He wanted Admiral Vex to believe the human forces were larger than they actually were, and positioned in locations where they were not. Deception would be as important as firepower in the coming battle. The Third Imperial Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Haven system exactly on schedule. Admiral Vex immediately deployed his ships into attack formation. Scouts moved ahead to gather information. The main battle group advanced in 3 waves. Heavy cruisers and battleships formed the core. Destroyers and frigates protected the flanks. Carrier vessels launched fighter craft to establish space superiority. Everything proceeded according to standard Valorian doctrine, which had won countless battles across the centuries. Lisa watched the enemy deployment from the Defiant. The Valorians were doing exactly what she expected. They were professional and disciplined, but they were also predictable. She had studied recordings of every Valorian battle for which intelligence existed. They always used the same basic tactics: overwhelming force applied through direct assault. It worked against most opponents because most opponents tried to match them ship for ship. Lisa had no intention of fighting that kind of battle. She divided her forces into 5 rapid strike groups. Each group consisted of 15 to 20 ships with mixed capabilities. The groups were positioned throughout the system using asteroid fields and gas clouds for cover. Lisa commanded Group 1 from the Defiant. Helen Miller led Group 2. Captain George Davis, who had delivered the heads to Emperor Draxos, volunteered to command Group 3. The remaining groups were led by Allied species commanders who understood the battle plan and agreed to follow human tactical coordination. The battle began when the Valorian scout ships encountered Group 4 near the orbit of New Haven's third moon. The scouts reported a small human force and called for reinforcements. Admiral Vex dispatched 40 ships to destroy what he believed was a poorly positioned enemy detachment. His ships moved with confidence. When they arrived, they found 23 human and allied vessels waiting. The forces were evenly matched. The engagement began with an exchange of long-range fire. Group 4 held position for exactly 12 minutes, then broke and ran. The Valorian ships pursued, believing they had their enemies in retreat. They chased Group 4 deeper into the asteroid field. That was when Groups 2 and 3 emerged from hiding and attacked the Valorian formation from both sides. The trap worked perfectly. The Valorian ships found themselves caught in a crossfire with asteroids limiting their maneuverability. They fought back hard and destroyed 6 human ships but lost 19 of their own before withdrawing. Admiral Vex realized he was facing a more sophisticated opponent than expected. He recalled his scattered forces and reformed his battle line. He would not fall for such tricks again. He advanced with his entire fleet moving slowly and maintaining tight formation. Nothing would break his line. He would grind through the human forces with pure superiority of numbers. Lisa let him come. She was patient. She had learned patience fighting the Krellian raiders who also favored direct assaults. When the main Valorian fleet reached the inner system, Lisa gave the order. All 5 strike groups converged on the enemy formation from different vectors. They did not try to break the Valorian line. Instead, they focused on specific targets. Group 1 attacked the left flank, concentrating fire on shield generators. Group 2 hit supply ships in the rear. Group 3 targeted sensor arrays on the command vessels. The attacks were coordinated down to the second. Valorian defenses struggled to respond to threats coming from multiple directions simultaneously. Beth Hayes led her fighter squadrons in during the chaos. 200 small craft streamed toward the Valorian flagship. Point defense systems destroyed 60 fighters before they reached attack range. The survivors pressed on. Beth's voice was calm over the communications network as she directed her remaining pilots. Target the shield generators. Alpha pattern. 3-second intervals. The fighters attacked in waves. Each wave drew defensive fire, allowing the next wave to get closer. They lost 30 more fighters before the first missiles reached the absolute victory. The Valorian flagship shuddered as multiple impacts overloaded sections of its shield array. Gaps opened in the defensive coverage. Beth ordered her remaining pilots to exploit the openings. Missiles and energy weapons poured through the gaps, striking armor and hull plating. The flagship's command systems took critical damage. Admiral Vex found himself unable to coordinate his fleet effectively. Individual ship captains began making their own tactical decisions. The tight formation started to dissolve. Lisa pressed the advantage. She ordered all groups to focus fire on the disabled flagship. The Defiant led the assault. Human ships poured everything they had into the absolute victory. The great warship that had won 50 battles for the Valorian Empire began to break apart. Secondary explosions rippled across its hull. Admiral Vex gave the order to abandon ship. Escape pods launched in all directions. The flagship that bore the name Absolute Victory exploded in a ball of flame that lit up the entire battlefield. The destruction of their flagship broke Valorian morale. Ships began withdrawing without orders. Some captains tried to rally their forces, but the coordination was gone. The human strike groups pursued hitting stragglers and damaged vessels. The battle that Admiral Vex expected to win in hours had turned into a disaster. After 6 hours of fighting, he gathered his surviving ships and retreated from the system. He had lost 47 vessels. His flagship was destroyed. His reputation was shattered. Lisa did not pursue the retreating Valorians. Her own forces had taken heavy losses. 29 ships destroyed, 42 damaged, over 3,000 dead. But they had won. They had defeated a force more than twice their size. More importantly, they had defeated the myth of Valorian invincibility. News of the battle would spread across the galaxy. Every species under Valorian control would hear that humans had stood and fought and won. The celebration on New Haven Station was tempered by grief for the fallen. Lisa attended memorial services for every ship's crew that had been lost. She knew many of the names personally. Emperor Draxos stood in his war room staring at a holographic display of the galaxy. Red markers indicated worlds under Valorian control. Blue markers showed human territory and their allies. For 3,000 years, the map had been almost entirely red. Now patches of blue were spreading like an infection. The defeat at New Haven had changed everything. Species that had paid tribute for centuries were now refusing. Colonial governors reported riots and rebellions. Trade routes were being disrupted. The foundation of his empire was cracking, and Draxos knew exactly who to blame. General Lisa Carter had become more than a military opponent. She had become a symbol of resistance across the galaxy. Her victory over the Third Fleet was being celebrated on worlds that had never even heard of humanity before. Songs were written about her. Underground networks distributed recordings of her speeches. Young warriors from a dozen different species wanted to fight like humans fought. Draxos understood that killing Lisa would no longer be enough. He had to crush humanity so completely that no one would ever dare follow their example again. He summoned every fleet commander and every military advisor to the imperial capital. The meeting lasted 3 days. Plans were drawn and discarded. Strategies were debated with brutal honesty. Finally, a consensus emerged. The Grand Imperial Fleet would be assembled. 500 warships, every available vessel from across the Empire. Emperor Draxos would command personally aboard his personal dreadnought, the Eternity's Wrath. This would be the largest military operation in Valorian history. There would be no retreat and no mercy. Humanity would be erased from existence. Lisa received intelligence reports about the fleet assembly 6 weeks after the Battle of New Haven. The numbers were staggering. 500 ships. She had 73 remaining operational vessels after repairs. Even with all her allies, she could muster maybe 300 ships total. The odds were worse than anything she had faced before. Some of her officers suggested evacuation, abandon the forward colonies and fall back to Earth's system, build defenses there and hope the Valorians would accept a negotiated border. Lisa rejected the idea immediately. Running now would doom humanity to eventual conquest. They had to make their stand here. She sent messages to every species that had ever expressed sympathy for the human cause. She called in every favor and made promises of future support. The response was better than expected. The Keltar committed their entire remaining fleet. The Paxians doubled their previous contribution. The Dryan Collective decided the risk of Valorian dominance was greater than the risk of open alliance with humans. They pledged 50 ships. A dozen smaller species added vessels. Some sent only 1 or 2 ships, but every contribution mattered. The United Coalition fleet began gathering at the Epsilon Cluster. The Epsilon Cluster was a region of dense star systems and strategic importance. Control of the cluster meant control of major trade routes and access to resource-rich worlds. Lisa chose it as the battleground deliberately. The Valorians would have to come to her. She spent 8 weeks fortifying positions and preparing surprises. Automated defense platforms were deployed. Minefields were laid. Supply depots were established. Every advantage she could create was put in place. Commander Beth Hayes rebuilt her fighter squadrons with new pilots and improved tactics. The losses at New Haven had been terrible, but the survivors were now combat veterans. She trained the new pilots personally. She taught them not just how to fly, but how to think like humans in combat. Be unpredictable. Be aggressive. Never give up even when the odds seem impossible. By the time the Valorian fleet arrived, Beth commanded 400 fighters organized into 40 squadrons. It still was not enough, but it would have to do. Helen Miller took command of the defensive platforms scattered throughout the Epsilon cluster. Each platform was essentially a weapons battery with minimal crew and thick armor. They could not move, but they could take tremendous punishment while dealing out devastating firepower. Helen positioned them at key choke points where Valorian ships would have to pass. She coordinated their fire control systems to work together as a unified network. The platforms alone could not stop 500 ships, but they could slow them down and inflict casualties. Jake Morrison remained on New Haven, stationed with his ground forces but sent his best tactical advisors to assist Lisa. He also coordinated evacuation plans for civilian populations in the Epsilon cluster. If the battle went badly, millions of people would need to flee. Transport ships were positioned at every colony. Emergency supplies were stockpiled. Jake hoped none of it would be necessary, but he learned long ago to prepare for the worst. Paul Wright worked 20-hour days coordinating intelligence and logistics. Keeping 300 ships supplied and organized was a massive challenge. Ships from 23 different species with different technologies and command structures. Paul created a unified communication network that allowed real-time coordination. He established protocols for everything from ammunition sharing to medical evacuations. The coalition was fragile, but Paul's work gave it a chance to function as a real fighting force. The Grand Imperial fleet arrived at the Epsilon cluster exactly 3 months after the defeat at New Haven. Emperor Draxos sat on the command throne of the Eternity's Wrath watching sensor displays, 500 ships at his command, the largest fleet ever assembled in this region of space. He could see the coalition forces ahead. 300 ships in defensive formation. They looked impressive, but mathematics told the story. 500 against 300. The coalition was doomed. Lisa stood on the bridge of the Defiant, surrounded by her command staff. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Thousands of lives depended on the decisions she would make in the next few hours. She thought about the path that had led to this moment. The assassination attempt. The heads she sent back. The victories and losses. Everything came down to this final battle. She opened a channel to the entire coalition fleet. Her voice was steady and clear. Today we fight not just for humanity, but for every species that refuses to bow to tyranny. We fight for the right to determine our own future. We fight for freedom. Make them remember this day. Make them remember that free people will always resist. Make them remember us. The battle began when the Valorian fleet entered weapons range. The first exchange of fire was catastrophic. Ships on both sides died in the opening minutes. The automated defense platforms opened up, shredding the Valorian vanguard. Helen Miller's careful positioning paid off. 20 Valorian ships were destroyed before they could even return fire, but the Grand Fleet kept coming. They had numbers to absorb losses that would break any other force. Lisa implemented the same rapid strike tactics that worked at New Haven, but on a much larger scale. Coalition forces split into strike groups and attacked from multiple vectors. They refused to engage in static combat where Valorian numbers would dominate. They hit hard, then withdrew. They targeted command ships and supply vessels. They created chaos in the Valorian formation. For every coalition ship destroyed, they took down 2 Valorian vessels. The math was still bad, but it was better than direct confrontation. Beth Hayes led her fighters straight at the Eternity's Wrath. 400 small craft against the most powerful warship in Valorian space. The Dreadnought's defenses were incredible. Point defense systems created a wall of fire. The first wave of fighters was almost completely destroyed. Beth's voice never wavered as she guided the survivors forward. Second wave, exploit the gaps. Third wave, target the shield generators. The fighters came in relentless waves. Each wave bought the next wave a few more seconds. Slowly, impossibly, they began to damage the great ship. Captain Ryan Foster commanded a heavy cruiser called the Valiant. When he saw the fighters struggling against the Eternity's Wrath, he made a decision without waiting for orders. He took his ship on a direct collision course with the Dreadnought. His crew understood what he was planning. None of them objected. They locked down all stations and diverted every bit of power to the engines and forward shields. The Valiant accelerated to ramming speed. Valorian defenders tried to stop the cruiser, but Foster's ship was already too close and moving too fast. The Valiant struck the Eternity's Wrath amidships. The impact was visible across the entire battlefield. A massive explosion tore through both vessels. The Valiant disintegrated instantly. The Dreadnought's shields collapsed. Armor plating buckled. Internal explosions rippled through its structure. Foster and his crew died instantly, but their sacrifice opened the target that Beth's fighters needed. Missiles and torpedoes poured through the breach in the Dreadnought's defenses. The great ship that Emperor Draxos believed unsinkable began to die. Draxos felt his throne shaking from repeated impacts. Damage reports flooded the command center. Engineering was gone. Weapon systems failing. Life support compromised. For the first time in his 3,000-year reign, Draxos faced the reality of personal defeat. He could die here. His empire could fall. These humans and their allies were going to win.